Well, good day, viewers. Today we have joining us live in studio Deputy Premier and Minister of Education, Culture, Youth Affairs, Agriculture and Sports, Dr. the Honorable Natalio Wheatley, who will be speaking on the subject of education in the British Virgin Islands. With the return of students to the physical classroom and rapid testing among educators and students are among some of the topics that will be discussed. But before we get to that interview, we will first take a quick commercial break.
The wait is over. CCT Fire is here. Experience ultra-fast downloads, seamless streaming, and even more reliable connectivity on an all-new fire-blazing super-fast CCT Fiber network. CCT Fire. Bring it home and upgrade today.
Well, welcome back, viewers. As mentioned previously, we have the Education Minister, Dr. the Honorable Natalio Wheatley, who's here in studio. Welcome, Dr. Wheatley.
Thank you, Kamal. It's great to be here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Well, let's start with the recent news that students will be returning to the classrooms from next week, January 24th. Well, as you mentioned previously, a special category of students will return to classrooms from next Monday. Now, speak on to those categories of persons who will be returning on that date.
We have students like special needs students. Actually, Cabinet had made a decision previously during this pandemic era for categories of students. So we're basically repeating the same categories. It included students with special needs, students who had to do technical subjects and they really needed to be on campus. It included students who are perhaps having struggles with their internet and other marginalized groups. You know, we had groups like those persons in Jas Van Dyke who had some real challenges with their internet and they have a really small population. But to avoid confusion, we asked that the Chief Education Officer write to the principals and to the parents to let them clearly know which particular groups will be coming in on Monday. It's going to actually be Tuesday now because the health services who was conducting a training for the persons in the education system had a crisis that they had to deal with. So we had to push it to Tuesday. So that's going to take place on the 25th now instead of the 24th.
Okay, and obviously you would have announced also too that the big day for the return of all students to the classrooms is set to be January 31st. That is obviously, of course, permitted that the COVID-19 cases in the territory continue to decline. Now, firstly, speak to the preparedness of the schools for welcoming children back, considering that there were some works to be done at some of the schools across the territory, whether it would have been mold, etc. Just speak to how prepared these schools are, considering there will be a face-to-face resumption of all students in the COVID-19 climate.
Well, by God's grace, we went through the budget period. We advocated for an increase in our funds from the previous year. The funds we received the previous year were not adequate to be able to deal with some of the maintenance issues. We are able to get an increase in funds. We're grateful for that. And work is going to be outgoing from the very beginning, from this month, January, straight up until December, focusing on the areas of highest priority first. And of course, yes, you've mentioned it, mold is a top priority. Certainly the level of preparedness, our team is working as hard as possible to rectify any challenges we have. But of course we know challenges pop up. The schools will not be 100%, but we'll do all that we can to make sure that they're ready to receive the students. And whatever outstanding issues, we will try our best to rectify given the funds that we've been allotted and given the time that we have.
My question, I'm sure a lot of persons would also have this question, will all schools be reopened, all public schools be reopened on that day, or will some schools be closed for continued works to be done on those schools, whether it be mold, etc.?
Well, on the 31st, we intend for all schools to open. If we do have an issue, and I've demonstrated this over the course of my tenure, if we have to close a school for health and safety reasons, I'll simply close the school and we'll simply make other accommodations for the students. Of course, health and safety comes first. Like I said before, in the past we haven't had all of the resources necessary to rectify some of the challenges we had. By God's grace, we have more resources this year and we'll be able to rectify more problems and have less incidences when schools have to close. But obviously, if there is a need to close a school, we will do that. Nothing like that has come to my attention at this moment.
And let's talk about, obviously, the climate in terms of the COVID-19 climate in the BVI. Obviously, I'm assuming that, those COVID protocols will be in full effect and enforced in the classrooms. So for those persons who are wondering, okay, well, my child, for example, goes to the Elmore Stout High School or the Elmore Stout Junior School, basically, where there are so many students in one classroom. Will there be a shift system for some schools, or will it be a situation? Well, I'm not going to preempt your response. Talk to me about what will be the current system in place for those classrooms that have large size students inside.
Well, at the Elmore Stout High School in particular, we have had a shift system. We have a very large population of students at the Elmore Stout High School, and we have limited space. This is why we're working so hard to build additional spaces on the Elmore Stout High School campus. It will allow us to move our students from the old Clarence Thomas building at Passer, and it will also allow students in the junior campus to have some more space. It's going to be an ongoing process as it pertains to creating space. We have this project that's slated to finish at the end of August. That will help to relieve some of our concerns. But we immediately have to turn our attention to the junior high schools on the west, which that work should be starting soon, and the junior high schools on the east, where we're still seeking an appropriate site for that school, as well as the development of the junior school on the main campus. So Elmore Stout High School presently is on a shift system because of space and because of the need to adhere to the social distancing protocols. But we're hopeful and we look forward to the future optimistically that we'll be able to return to a full day of school in the future. And in the near future.
And what about some of the other schools? I know you spoke specifically just now to the Elmore Stout High School and some of the other junior schools on the west and stuff. But in terms of ultimately, on a general perspective, for the ordinary school, will all the students be allowed to return at once, or is it only the Elmore Stout High School that will be operating on a shift system?
We're going to have a full day of school in all other schools.
Okay, great. Well, now let's turn to the topic now of testing within schools. I know obviously that is a big topic in the territory. You did announce that your ministry, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, will be basically conducting rapid antigen tests among students and education staff. And then obviously you would have spoken on some of the initial plans in our first interview where you broke the news to me, and I would have made that disclosure basically to the public. So that's explain to the public in the intricate details of how this testing regime will work.
Well, I'll save the intricate details for the Chief Education Officer and Public Health. But what I can say, Kamal, is that we will have a testing regime consistent with what I said to you when you first broke that story. And the reason why we're having a testing regime is to ensure the safety of our students, our teachers, our administrators. COVID-19 has proven itself to be a deadly disease. In just about every country in the world, we've had COVID deaths. Here in the territory, we have over 40 COVID deaths. And we have learned that COVID-19 is particularly lethal when it's contracted by persons who have underlying health conditions. And we do have persons in our school system with underlying health conditions. We have teachers, we have administrators, and in some instances we even have children who have underlying health issues. So we have to be very cautious about putting our children in an environment where they could contract COVID-19. So in addition to testing, we're asking persons to wear masks. We're asking them to have their children sanitized and social distance. And we're asking that if children have symptoms, if they have a runny nose or a fever, that you don't send them to school. And of course, we are taking their temperature by the time they get to the gate. The testing regime, it will certainly be a nose swab. And it's not those nose swabs that persons have become very afraid of. When we first introduced testing in the territory, it was PCR testing with the swabs that went very far up your nose, almost close to your brain. Those are not the swabs we're using. These are swabs that basically you make some circular motions in the front of the nose. It's not an uncomfortable or unpleasant sensation at all. And we have specific persons within the education system who will be trained to administer those nose swabs. And I'm told in some instances, or in many instances, the students themselves will be able to do these nose swabs. And then they'll be assisted by other persons who will help them to be able to administer the results. And of course, if someone tests positive, obviously those results will have to be verified, but those persons will have to be isolated, and we'll have to have contact tracing, which is the case now whenever you have a positive case. And we're doing this to ensure that we have continuity in the education system. So I don't anticipate that you'll shut down an entire school, for instance, if you have a positive case. What we're trying to do is prevent outbreaks in the school and get ahead of these things. And that's why we're introducing a testing regime. Kamal, it is not a mass testing regime. As many persons who will consent, we will provide tests for, because there are quite a number of parents out there who are concerned about sending their children to school and having them possibly contract COVID-19 from another student, and to bring it home, and perhaps even bring it home to a grandfather or grandmother with an underlying condition. So despite the fact we've had some persons who've expressed concern about having to conduct a test, we've had other persons, privately and otherwise, express concern about persons coming to school who possibly may have COVID-19 and pose a threat to others. So we know that there's great support for a testing regime as well. But the testing regime is completely by consent.
Right, because that was my next question, because that obviously would have been a major concern after persons would have seen
Yes.
the letter circulating from the Ministry of Education, basically asking for permission to give consent to allow a child or guardian of someone to basically be tested for COVID.
Yes.
And we would have seen obviously some response from the public where they would have been under the impression that it is somewhat mandatory. So obviously you're here to explain that as well in terms of, you know, the stance on that letter. For those persons who choose not to give consent or to their child or guardian to be tested, just speak to what will happen in those cases.
Well, if you refuse to give consent, the child can still come to school. The child will not be denied the right for an education. But we want to encourage parents. We want to encourage guardians. We want to encourage persons who are responsible to allow your children to be tested. It's better for you to know their status than to not know their status. I don't see any good reason whatsoever to deny your children and yourself the opportunity to know their COVID-19 status. As I said before, the test is not uncomfortable at all. Many of these tests are administered at the ports when we travel. When we travel, these are things that we have to do, and of course we accept that we have to do them when we travel. And I think we should take the very same concern for the safety of the children in our education system. So I don't see any reason whatsoever why someone would want to deny themselves knowledge of knowing the COVID status of their children. But if they, for whatever reason, want to object, their children will still be able to receive an education. And certainly, Kamal, the testing is going to be sampling. Certainly, we don't have the resources to be able to test every single student every single week because the tests are expensive. As you would know, the tests are in great demand around the world. Many countries have shortages, and it's cost prohibitive to test every single student at every week. So we have to be mindful of our resources, and therefore we decided to use a sampling regime. And in addition to that, we have to take our own precautions by making sure we adhere to the other protocols.
And you talk about a sample regime. You did mention as well that it's unfeasible to be testing every single week. So how often will this sampling occur regarding, obviously, ultimate? I'm only assuming that it's essential to test prior to re-entry into the classrooms. Then after that date, how often then will testing happen? Will it be once every month? Will it be every other month? Is there a plan in place for such?
The health services have promised us to come up with a logical and reasonable regime for the testing, and I wouldn't want to reveal those details until all of the details of that have been fleshed out. But persons can be certain that there will be testing at various schools after this initial testing. For the initial testing, I believe they want to get as many persons as possible to get a good baseline idea of what the schools look like. We know that the spike that we had for December and January, that it's waning. Our cases are reducing, but we have to remain vigilant because an event like opening of school could actually cause the COVID-19 to continue to spread much longer than we wanted it to. So the cases are falling. We want them to continue to fall. We want to get some good baseline data of what's the situation among the student population right now. So as many persons can consent as possible, we certainly welcome that. But thereafter, we will have a sampling regime, and details of that will follow, and we'll make sure that 284 Media has those details.
Great. And so we talk about the students testing. Now let's talk about the educational staff testing now, because obviously they're not only teachers within a school, they're all obviously ground staff, they're porters, messengers, etc. Also within that letter, also placed emphasis on staff being tested as well. I know obviously you mentioned that it's not mandatory, but just speak about how the testing will go about for the staff and what's really required in terms of encouraging. Will it be a situation where they will be mandated to either test, or what's the situation in terms of staff?
At this point, we haven't mandated anyone to be tested, but we certainly would expect that the teachers, the administrators, the principals, the staff at the schools will be a good example to the students, and they would consent to be tested. As I said before, we would have had many persons in the past who would have been afraid of the PCR test. This test is not a PCR test, it's a rapid antigen test. It's administered to the front of the nose. It doesn't go to the back of the nose where it's uncomfortable. And I see no good reason why an adult, I think the adult should be even more enthusiastic and even more prepared to have a test done than the students. And I'm hopeful that we are not disappointed in that area as it pertains to teachers putting up any objection. I don't think that would send a lot of confidence to many of the parents who are sending the children to the teachers' care. But I'm confident that the teachers will comply and get tested. I'm confident of that.
And just to bring somewhat of a context as well to that question, because when we look over to our neighboring United States Virgin Islands, where we see that they would have made it, their Department of Education would have made it mandatory for all students and educators involved in that system to be tested. I think it would have commenced from this Monday that just went. In contrast to here, where it's more relaxed, do you think that it may ever come to a point that, if the situation doesn't better basically when it comes to COVID cases, that ultimately you may have to make it the measures are more stringent when it comes to testing?
Well, actually, Kamal, I think we're actually going in the opposite direction. I think that as time goes on, you'll notice that protocols will become more relaxed and persons will start to treat COVID-19 more like a cold or a flu. And I think as of course, in this initial period, because COVID is so lethal, we've taken certain steps to protect persons. But going into the future, I believe at some point, and I believe there are many other schools of thought or other persons who've expressed this school of thought, that eventually we will see protocols continue to relax, especially as persons become vaccinated, especially as persons' immune systems become accustomed to COVID-19 and it's less deadly. And perhaps we'll take more specific measures to protect persons who are particularly vulnerable. But Kamal, I'm looking forward to the day when COVID-19 won't go anywhere. I'm looking forward to the day when it will no longer cause the disruption to our schools and our society that it's causing right now.
Well, indeed, you just touched on it, as we would have seen the United Kingdom announcing yesterday, basically that going forward within the next week or so, there will be it will no longer be mandatory to wear masks in the United Kingdom, and as well when it comes to secondary schools, the children will no longer be required to wear masks as well. Let's take a turn now to the you touched on it earlier, the redevelopment plan for the Elmore Stout High School. We would have seen somewhat of a back and forth when it comes to the project from the opposition leader, basically stating that he, in his opinion, taxpayers' money has been wasted with the choice to come up with a new redevelopment plan as opposed to using the NDP's plan. You yourself would have touched on it yesterday at the opening of that stakeholders meeting for that redevelopment plan. You would have said basically that you and your government would have assessed the plan from the NDP government, and it wasn't adequate enough, considering that plan was done prior to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, where it's not basically as resilient as it should be in terms of for future natural disasters in the territory.
Yes, well, I didn't get to hear the opposition leader when he made those statements. I did see something reported in the news, but if in fact the opposition leader did say that, I find it very irresponsible and I find it very misleading, and I'm disappointed that he would state something like that. He obviously has not even seen the plans for which he spoke of, because it certainly was not a comprehensive plan. What was there was a conceptual drawing for a master plan, which is not dissimilar to the concept we have for a master plan right now. And the only drawings that had any kind of schematics to them, serious architectural drawings and of course mechanical and engineering drawings, was a building that was slated for an auditorium and a cafeteria. And that auditorium and cafeteria, if you look at the exterior of it, it was lots of glazing, and glazing is just a term persons in the profession use for lots of glass. And anybody who would see a building that was filled with so much glass would have to question whether it would be wise to put a building like that full of glass that could easily be destroyed by a hurricane like Irma or Maria. There were also some prefabricated buildings, and certainly we took the decision that prefabricated buildings were not the way to go with the possibilities of very strong Category 5 storms. So we decided to go with block as opposed to prefabricated buildings. We have a strong team in the ministry. We have Ms. Lorna Stevens, who's a project officer who deals with these type of things. We have the Recovery and Development Agency, and we have the project unit in the Ministry of Finance. And I have full confidence in their abilities to be able to assess such things and to advise me in the way that we should go. We followed their advice. Their advice has been good advice, and we expect to see a good project delivered by the end of August. And the further development of the campus, when it comes to auditoriums and cafeterias and recreational facilities, we're still in dialogue with the public about those things. Even though we have a master plan, that master plan is subject to improvements, and we expect to have an ongoing dialogue with the public about them.
Now let's backtrack to the stakeholder meeting yesterday. Obviously, it was held for consultation with the relevant persons. What's the biggest take from yesterday's meeting that you would say came out that you would have took into consideration that you probably was not aware of previously?
Well, I should say to you, even before yesterday's public meeting, we had an excellent meeting with the teachers and the principals, administrators, and it was very revealing. This project won't be able to basically be solved or solve some of those issues, but they brought a lot that should be taken into consideration in this project and in the broader redevelopment. Things like parking. Parking was brought up. The same recreational facilities, the same facilities that can be used for theater arts. The need to be able to accommodate arts and crafts and different kind of technical subjects, all of those things came to the fore. And some of those things will be taken into account with this particular project, particularly the parking. But some of the other things, I believe when we have the further redevelopment of the school, we'll be able to incorporate those things.
So August basically is the date to look forward to?
Yeah, well, the project is supposed to be finished August 31st.
Great. Well, any other thing you would like to add before we go?
No, just I'm glad for the support of the public. I'm glad for your patience, for your resilience. It's been a very tough 2021 in the education system, primarily because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing recovery from the hurricanes. But we've shown great resilience, and we look forward to a better year this year, and we look forward to getting some outstanding issues solved. And I want to thank the principals, administrators, the teachers. I want to thank the parents. I want to thank the students. I want to thank the Ministry of Education for all you have done to be able to ensure that we have a continuity in our education system and we continue to provide a quality education to our students. And we look forward to greater success in this 2022 year.
Well, I also want to thank you, Dr. Wheatley, for your time as well.
Thank you, Kamal. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share with the public.
Indeed. Well, viewers, that was the Deputy Premier and Minister of Education, Culture, Youth Affairs, Agriculture and Sports, Dr. the Honorable Natalio Wheatley. I hope you would have enjoyed the comprehensive explanation of the recent topical issues in education as of recent. I'm Kamal Haynes. Until next time, have a great evening.